just before 5 o'clock in the morning local time. Both ground troops and from the air moving in from 3 different borders, north, south, and east, moving in, and blasts even heard in the capital city of Kyiv. Constanze Stelzenmüller is with us. She has been part of our show before. She is the Fritz Stern Chair. She's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and she is in Washington, D.C. Constanze, thank you very much for returning to our program at this moment. Charles Michel from the European Council called it a cataclysm which has shaken Europe. We also heard this as being described as the gravest act of aggression on European soil in generations. Your response to what we are seeing from Russia this morning?
Well, I think all that is right. We're seeing a war in Europe, and I think it's been proven this morning that all those who thought that deterrence would work, that Putin would never do this, and that if he would do it, it would only be a limited action to secure the little statelets run by the separatists, who are, of course, proxy actors for Russia in the uttermost east of Ukraine, have been mistaken. What we are looking at is an all-out war against the entirety of Ukraine. A high-speed attack against multiple points, multiple borders of Ukraine at the same time, and major cities, clearly designed to destroy Ukraine's army on the ground and to change the regime in Kyiv. And of course, this is not just an outrage and a tragedy for the citizens of Ukraine, and a tragedy for all those Russians who believe that this is utterly wrong. It is also the greatest danger for European security since World War II.
We'll explore all of those points in a little bit more detail. When you say regime change in Kyiv, how far do you think this will go? What do you believe is his ultimate ambition here? He talked about demilitarization, denazification, as he's tried to create the narrative that there is a neo-Nazi base in the east of Ukraine, of course debunked, but this is what he said in his televised address. How far will he go, and to what end, do you think?
Yes, he's also suggesting that he needs to defend Russian citizens against a genocide, also a claim that is completely debunked, and that Ukraine has never had an identity of its own, and so on. I think it's completely worthless to spend any analytical time on these bogus claims. But again, it seems to me that what we're looking at is an attempt to all out return Ukraine to Russia as a part of Russian territory. We've already seen the all but complete integration of Belarus. And I think that if the West's response is not one of maximum sharpness and strength, then I think the European security order itself is at risk. Recall that Putin has previously said that the end of the Soviet Union was a tragedy for Russia, and that the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov recently said that after 1991, the demise of the Soviet Union, all the territories of the Warsaw Pact were orphan territories, quote unquote. All of this suggests that if Putin thought he could successfully swallow Ukraine, as it were, that he might feel that it could be possible militarily and politically to return current EU and NATO member states who were formerly part of the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, to Russia. I think we have to be prepared for the worst here.
In response, you just said the West must have sharp, strong response. I'll talk militarily in just a moment, but in terms of sanctions, we've heard from Ursula von der Leyen, for example. We've heard as well from Charles Michel. We will hear from Joe Biden, the U.S. president, with the promise of the toughest and most focused and targeted sanctions that we have yet seen. Of the measures that are being discussed at this point, there have already been some banks, there have already been some Russian oligarchs and individuals, but what are the tools available now that would be that strong, sharp response from a sanction point of view that you just called for?
Well, Germany already has said that the pipeline project Nord Stream 2 is now suspended. And, while technically it is just a refusal to continue the certification process, I think we can assume at this point that the pipeline is dead in the ground and will never be filled with gas. End of, full stop. The sanctions package, I think at this point, will come out at the uppermost echelon of what allies have been planning together for months. My sense from what I've been reading is that there is still some dispute as to whether to include Russian access to SWIFT, the financial messaging service for banks at this point, or to leave some room for escalation. There's probably legitimate arguments to do one or the other, frankly.
Okay. Let me just jump in. As you said, SWIFT is a financial system. It shuffles money from bank to bank around the world, and that would be considered one of the toughest financial steps that countries and organizations could take. Along that line, financially, there's some discussion about whether one measure should be to deny Russia even access to the U.S. dollar. Is that part of what you'd consider?
Look, I'm probably not the best person to ask about this kind of thing.
Okay.
I'm not a sanctions expert, but I will say this. I think it's also important to understand that Russia will be diplomatically a pariah on the scale of North Korea after this. And my final point is that this has huge implications for NATO's planning and force posture. This is the end of the NATO-Russia Act, presumably, which was an attempt to build a bridge of communication and trust building with Russia after 1997. And I think we will see the NATO response force, the VJTF, called out. And because with the end of the NATO-Russia Act, I think we will also see permanent forward basing of NATO forces on NATO's eastern flank. And as far as I'm concerned, that is a very good thing indeed.
Well, indeed, we were listening live, Constanze, to Secretary General Stoltenberg as he announced that very fact that the defense plan, the NATO response force, is one of the things that they're looking at ahead of a NATO summit tomorrow. And he was very clear, again, with Ukraine not a NATO member, NATO will not fight for Ukraine, but also made repeated references to the concern about this spilling over into NATO nations and how important it is to be avoiding any missteps, any miscalculation, any misinformation. What exactly do you think NATO should be doing in response at this point?
So, Heather, that's an incredibly important point, one of that I've been making for a very long time. I have had people telling me, because Ukraine is not a member of NATO, Article 5 doesn't apply. And so, as it were, the West could cordon itself off from the risks of conflict in Ukraine. That assessment couldn't be more erroneous. I think there is a huge risk of a military, political, economic spillover. In fact, we're already seeing this spillover in terms of the markets tanking and the gas price spiking. But it is entirely possible that you could see, shall we say, this just is speculative, but it's not impossible. Russian forces pursuing Ukrainian forces, NATO member states letting them in, and then making a unilateral decision to protect them militarily. You can imagine what I'm getting at here. It is absolutely imaginable.
And if anyone is wondering why we're focusing, why this is such an important flashpoint, it is because of those sweeping potential consequences.
Yes, exactly. So I think there are two things need to happen here, I think, now. I think Western leaders need to be honest and need to be clear with their publics as to what they can expect. I think for too long a time, that has not happened. And I think we need to understand that we're all Ukrainians now, literally. and that what is happening in Ukraine is our business. And if we don't stand up for Ukraine, we won't be standing up for ourselves. Apart from that point of principle, I think we also need to understand that we are looking at potentially massive humanitarian crises on the ground, with a need for the protection of Ukrainian civilians by international organizations such as the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and the International Red Cross. That humanitarian aid might need military protection. That in turn will require Western leaders having very firm words with the Russians, and so on. There is a lot we are going to be having to do a lot at the same time. And again, it's about us, it's not just about Ukraine.
Constanze, I cannot thank you enough for your depth and for your thoughtfulness. It's given us a lot to mull over as we watch these early hours. Thank you very much. I look forward to your returning to the program as we continue to follow this. Constanze Stelzenmüller, she's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, the Fritz Stern Chair in Washington, D.C.